everybody, this is Matt, and I wanted to welcome you all to our very first interview with Timepoint Ensemble. Today we have composer Jordan Kusel joining us, and I'll let him introduce himself now.
Okay. Hey everybody, my name is Jordan Kusel. I'm a composer based out of Seattle, and I work with chamber and electroacoustic music, and yeah.
So I guess the first thing I want to ask you, because you mentioned about it, why electronic music? What about it?
I have a problem with the way that acoustic music sounds, and I know that sounds like a really broad thing, but it's something that I'm trying to tackle through acoustic music and also through electronic music, because a lot of my work, I think at this point, concerns the production aspects of a recording, or what a recording space sort of means to the music that's held inside of it. So I would say that electronic music, because it is, first of all, as a recording, you can access a recording at any point, and I think that because of that, it has a lot to offer as opposed to a live performance. Whether it's the means of listening to it, or how people, put it on at home or put it on in their headphones and listen to it, and the spaces that they listen to it in. But another thing is just the ability to chop is... I was working with my violin player last night, and there was a section that I was doing recordings with him over and over and over. And the effect that I was going for was as if there was a chopped recording halfway through the passage, and then the passage started again. So he tried to play around with different muting things, and it was kind of a realization that that's a hurdle that I'm trying to make acoustic music do that I got from electronic music. So that's a bit of a verbose answer. I hope that makes sense.
I think it does, and I guess I have a little insight into that since I've premiered one of your works, that it made me think about it. Yeah, right away when you mentioned about the idea of chopping a piece, a segment, and then going through it again, because in the work, Cold Surrogate, A Penance Play, you wrote that I premiered. Maybe we'll throw up an example of the notation so people can see it, and I'll use one of the ones I used from the article I wrote explaining the notation, where a cell will be presented, and then you'll have me go through the cell again, and it'll be subjected to a tempo slide, or fragments will be taken in or out. So is that sort of the core of what you were talking about? And this is, I guess that happened earlier, so things have progressed since then, but is that a part of it?
Yeah, definitely. As far as those chops or cuts or edits, I've been thinking about them more as like film edits lately, if you have some sort of reverse shot in a conversation. But those, obviously, when you're performing chops that you see on a page, it's going to sound like a fluid passage no matter what you do, because you can't get a break in production space, or you don't have the sound of a sample ending that you would have if it was electronically presented. So I find that both like frustrating and interesting, if that makes sense. Those sorts of chops that you performed, it's something that I'm starting to try to realize for larger ensembles, where if instead of the whole ensemble playing at once, you actually have these broad timbral chops between instruments of brief phrases, that's a way to realize that. But yeah, that piece in particular, I mean, you may have touched on it like while you were learning it, but it's part of my interest. Like the electronic track for that is very much like there are points where reverb tail is just the end, or there are points where you're kind of bombarded by this strange timbre. And that's something that I definitely started exploring through that piece, and it's kind of pervading everything that I do now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like there's we shared the recording of it through our YouTube channel and our website maybe 2 weeks ago from when we're recording this, and it's interesting, and I still find it interesting to hear it through a recording versus in the live space, which is interesting because you're talking a lot about these reverb qualities, and one of the cool parts of purely electronic music is that you have the ability to sort of create and craft for the listener experience, where you can sample it for headphones or whatnot, but then you introduce this live element and you sort of end up in the same problem where it's such a carefully crafted sonic environment. Like I remember we discussed like what is the space like, and then you start to craft the sound for that space, and then to hear it come through a recording, it's sort of, I guess it runs into those same problems. So I guess as a composer, how do you think you would deal with that, or would you care?
It's something that, especially for that, just given the logistics of you were in Chicago and I was in the middle of Texas, I couldn't actually go hear the space. My long-term solution for that is eventually I'd like to play around with virtual reality performances and recordings. And I know that's a big rabbit hole we can go down, but it was the most immediate way that I thought to solve that is imagine if you could strap on a headset, log into a telematic concert, and you have real performers who, because the instrument is being performed elsewhere, you can control that space with the same amount of nuance that you can control listening to a recording. But it's still concert experience in real time with other people. So that's the 10 years down the road answer to that question.
It's interesting because there's the university here in town has a telearts media lab, and I remember when they launched it in my undergrad, they had done a string quartet concert with players in different parts of the world. So I guess I kind of mentioned that, since for someone listening to this, they'd be like, that's totally bizarre and unattainable. But it's like, well, it's actually already happening, just not at such a high precision yet, since technology has to catch up.
There's definitely a basis for it, but it seems like the kind of pieces that are most able to be presented that way are more indeterminate pieces, or like rhythmically indeterminate. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for where that technology is going, so hopefully in the future that'll be a possibility. But as far as tackling that in the performance space, there's another thing I've been thinking about that has to do with the noise floor of recordings. In most cases, you want as pure a recording as possible, but I've been experimenting more with, I don't want to say like a leaving the windows open style of taking samples, but something like if you have a field recording of very low in the mix present during the course of a piece, it can dramatically recontextualize what's happening with the performers or what's happening with the space. So kind of taking those things that would be artifacts that you don't want and introducing them into a live performance, I think that that's definitely a way to go. So I guess my solution, instead of the problem of trying to cut off a reverb tail or something of that nature, is actually to introduce more noise and have the performers fight it to circumvent those kinds of issues, I guess.
Interesting. Why don't we leave that thought here, just so we don't end up talking for like 4 hours, which would be too easy. You mentioned, again, we'll put up an example of some notation, but how are you going about notating this for larger groups? Since I know your notation, at least parts of it, and I'm trying to imagine how would you transmit that level of detailed information to a larger group?
As far as, I guess this work in question has a lot of tempo ramps, like very rapid, dramatic tempo ramps throughout. I like the cycling idea where you play the same measure with different tempo ramps, but obviously something like that, especially if you're sitting in front of a conductor, isn't super feasible. I'm actually working on a software now that if anybody wants to help me with it, it's on GitHub, and you can download it. I don't know if you can put a link up, but it's definitely a work in progress. And it's for working with polytempo structures with larger ensembles. So I'm trying to use this to write right now. You can say, like, I want to go from 60 beats per minute to 120 beats per minute over the course of 7 beats. And it'll tell you exactly where in milliseconds those beats lie. And then you can take and align those to other types of tempo ramps that are going on. If you want to go from 80 to 20 over the course of 4 beats, you can stick that inside or have synchronization points. So you can sort of come up with a scheme like this and then print off a piece of graph paper that shows you exactly where all the timing is laid out and use that to write. So I've been playing around with that. I don't know how you conduct it yet, but maybe a headphone mixer with click tracks or something. So I'm still working through the technical details of that. But if you want to go on my GitHub, it's a Python script you can download, and there are a couple of things you have to download to get it to work. But that's been a longer-term project of mine to try to solve some of those issues.
Very cool, because I know I had many a sleepless night working on some of those tempos myself.
Right, yeah, no, and I apologize for that. I hope some element of the process was fun or different or something.
I think I love that process. For me as a performer, I love when we get these opportunities, since the classical canon sort of devoid of these explorations where you're challenged not only as a musician, but you're really challenged as an artist, and you have to put into real world these problems.
Yeah, because
it was a lot of work. I'm very glad I did it. I love the piece. I'm still trying to find some chances to perform it again and work it into our seasons. That would make sense.
Yeah, and I'd love to work on a studio recording with you too, because that's the kind of thing that you could take some of those production aspects and I think really do a lot with them as far as a recording goes. But yeah, I mean, composers are always looking for good performers to guinea pig ideas like that. So I learned a lot from that process too.
There's something you did in that piece which I think whenever I've shown it to anyone, especially somebody who has an interest in notation, and like we've talked, I love notation. I love non-standard notation. You did a thing in essentially what we'll call the coda section of the piece that used transparencies. Do you want to talk about that a bit? Because this is super fascinating to me, both interpretationally and as like an application.
I have like more than a passing interest in design, which I think a lot of composers do with just the amount of time that they spend on scores and having to get. I mean, I don't want to be a score fetishist or anything, but the way I tried to do that piece is as a sort of artifact that you can open and then pour through or play through or whatever. Have it be more of a tome than a score. I don't know if you can say that. So in the coda section, if I can describe it, I took sheets of clear vellum or translucent vellum, and I printed fragments directly from the other parts of the piece. And I want to say it's 6 or 7 layers. But as you peel back each layer, you start to uncover the layers underneath just because they've been covered by transparencies. So depending on the visibility, it lets you interpret in those kind of bite-sized chunks that I was going for in the rest of the piece, these musical ideas. And you can play through them around the page in any order that you want, with any density that you want. But I like that I was really trying to break time in every way possible. Like another little kitsch thing that I guess I did with the score is that the coda is actually at the beginning beforehand. So you have to flip through all of the pages as a performer on stage to get to those initial transparencies. And then you play through them to the middle of the score, basically. So I like, even if the perception of it is pretty linear in time, Another one of my problems is how do you break time over the course of a temporal work? So that's something that's another big problem of mine. I would say that time and production are the two big problems that I try to write pieces to solve. Yeah, if that answers that question.
I have an interesting thought I'll sort of project towards you. I had a conversation. There's a composer in town here, Mark Limaker. He's going to do an interview as well with us, but he also likes to break time and sort of rob rhythm and time of its sort of abilities and make things timeless. In one process he does a lot, he wrote us a work last year called Slow, Quiet, Boring Study, and it's totally unmeasured. You play until you're out of air, and it sort of takes, in ways, I guess, more akin to like Messiaen, to break the constraints of time. And we were talking, and one thing I said I loved about sort of, to coin like the radical aesthetic, or, works like A Cold Surrogate that you wrote, is that almost in a way, by the sheer complexity of both rhythm and virtuosity of the playing, it accomplishes the exact same thing by basically taking away all the qualities, that rhythm and virtuosity that we would expect because of the traditional canon. And it sort of ends up being the same quality, where it is free of time and free of virtuosity, and it becomes, totally temporal. Yeah, it's just, you mentioned that, and I was like, oh yeah, I've had this conversation recently.
And I think I if I can do like a book plug, I just read Eldritch Priest's Boring Formless Nonsense, where he goes through kind of a history of like radical form pieces or 6-hour nothing happens works, I guess, to try not to lump them all together. But like the Feldman 6-hour piece, where you can come to a point where it's almost like there's a breaking through point where you're able to settle into something, but it takes however long to get there. And when you did A Cold Surrogate, a Penance play, like live, I think the silence section of that ended up being like 9 minutes, was it? 8 or 9 minutes?
It was around 15.
15, okay, yeah.
And I guess we should say the silent part is video. So if you watch, there'll be a link below the actual performance of it. When we mastered the YouTube version of it, we'll call it, we used the standard length non-processed video part, because we're like, if you put a 15-minute silent video clip with 2 short horn interruptions in the middle, like no one will watch it. So
right.
In the live performance, it was
right. Yeah, there was a bit of practicality for
which I remember some of the feedback from the live performance, where people were talking like they've never seen that much tension in a room, especially because, I guess, a little fun behind the scenes thing. You sent me the video part for that. Do you remember when? How close to the concert it was?
I mean, it was pretty close, and I profusely apologize.
The morning of.
Yeah, the morning of.
But it was interesting. It really, and like I'd never had a chance to run it with the processing patch running in the background. Mm-hmm. So we had our conversations where we're like, yeah, it'll be 5 minutes, and that was a passing conversation we had. And so when I was on stage performing, like, it's going to be 5 minutes. And just, people were like, my angst, there's part, I think it was just like circular breathing, valve tremolos for like 2.5 minutes. And I'm looking at the computer, I'm like, it says everything's running. Yeah. And so then when the horn finally came in the coda, it was one of the most unique experiences I've been a part of, where this silence had gone from being like strange to confusing to boring to unsettling, to nerve-wracking. And then when finally the horn came in, you're like, oh, thank God, it's finally happened. And it was just a tremendous impact. But that was a memorable moment.
that makes me so happy to hear. There are, as far as silence, or even like variations on silence being the noise floor in a recording or whatever, or in a concert hall, the number of permutations that silence can go through, I think, is really interesting. Like, the settling in is just one of 5 or 6 different types of that suspension, and that's definitely something that I want to explore further. I like the idea of ridiculous density followed by, are we going to get something more here? Or, okay, when is this coming? Okay, maybe this is it. Oh, wait, what's this? As a listener-imposed formal element. Yeah, and that's something I definitely want to explore more. So yeah, this is admission of guilt, but that section was only supposed to be 5 minutes. But if it was effective during the performance, right on.
It was tremendous. I was engaged and panicking a little bit, but it was great. People loved it. It was, and especially because the program notes had, at some point I had talked to some people saying it was going to be 5 minutes, so there's people in the audience that were like, it's supposed to be 5 minutes. What is happening right now? And just, they became unnerving. And as you said, for silence to go through change is very interesting, since that's something that's very hard to in some ways it seems so abstract that you couldn't control it, yet you in ways can. Why don't we jump off that thought, and then I guess the last question I'm going to ask you, and then we'll chop this up, is this wonderfully vague term we use, new music. I guess, what does that mean to you? Or what does it encompass? What's the purpose? Since it's not something as defined as like the romantic era, where we can say this is the qualities of romantic music, where we're in a time now where you have post-genre music, radical aesthetic, minimalism, and the list goes on infinitely. So yeah, because here in Calgary, there's this wonderful term that gets thrown around that I loathe, and it's the term contemporary classical. And every time I hear it, it makes the hair stand on the back of my neck in anger. But so yeah, for you, I guess, what's new music to you? What's it about? To sum up a very large thought.
Oh, man. What do I have, like 30 seconds?
You got some time. We can always... This will probably end up in the sponsor part, so they're paying to hear it.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, contemporary classical, like, if I'm talking to visual artists or to designers or to people who write code, and I tell them that I work on new music is itself a term that only new music knows. I remember the first time that I heard that term, and I was like, okay, that's kind of vague and strange, but it definitely has to do a lot with instrumentation. Whether that instrumentation is the standard instruments of the orchestra or of the chamber ensemble that will always feel, I think, that they're displaced by new music, that they're meant to do things that they weren't designed for. So maybe that's a good definition of new music, is it's sort of a reappropriation of what musical technology was originally supposed to do. And you can take that to the extreme of, if you have a more performance-based work, if you're performing on a wooden table in front of an audience, you're taking that table places that it wasn't intended to go. So maybe that's the best definition of new music, is whether through the musical elements that it tries to achieve, or its form, or the use of the instruments. It's kind of an uncomfortable place for everyone involved. And I would hope that it never ceases to be uncomfortable, because that means that there are new things that we can explore sonically.
Perfect. That's an awesome answer.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, because to me, new music, I guess to round it up here, it's that it does lack descriptible genre. You can't place it.
Mm-hmm.
Where, to me, contemporary classical has this pejorative sense that it comes from the classical tradition. And, for example, you can take, someone like Ted Hearn, who's known for his post-genre music, and you can say, well, how can you say this is contemporary classical? It sort of ends at the instruments in their hand. And it's like you said, there's instruments doing things like a bassoon should usually never make the sounds they do in Ted's music.
Yeah.
Where we could almost trace its lineage more into like free jazz, but we still lump it into this big powdery wig group of people. But no, that's
yeah, and that's it's strange how the thing that could be the least wig powdery uses the terminology of uses the terminology of that canon or whatever, or still uses the notation of that canon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, this is great. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun.
This
Thanks
is
a lot, Matthew.
The inaugural one, the exciting.
Wonderful.
Here, and since I have you here, and I don't know, maybe I'll leave this in and I'll take it out. You remember, are you still doing that work, the La Polex thing? I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. If you'd like access to the complete interview, head on over to www.patreon.com/timepoint, and you can sign up there. There's also a link below. With a small donation of $5 a month, you'll get access to the extended interviews, as well as a lot of other digital content. So please head on over and join us.